Who won World War II? This is one of those questions to which completely different answers are given in different countries. In the United States, they will say, "We did." In Russia, they will say, "No, we did." In the United Kingdom, China, and even in Australia, they will say the same. And of course, each of them will be right in their own way. But what if we try to answer it without politics, without emotions, only through numbers, through scale, through contribution to the war, through the losses that were sustained? Because World War II is not just a conflict, it is the largest catastrophe in the history of humanity, in which from 70 to 85 million people died. And if we want to understand who won, we must first understand who actually did what in this war and what each side lost. The war was not just between countries, it was a clash of two systems. On one side were the countries of the so-called Axis. The Axis was an alliance of Germany, Italy, and Japan. On the other side were the so-called Allies, the USSR, the United States, the United Kingdom, China, and dozens of other countries. Today, we will try to evaluate the war not simply by the list of countries, but by the functions and roles performed by the participating nations. Who destroyed ground armies? Who paid in blood? Who produced weapons? Who provided logistics? Who restrained the enemy? This way, we can get a more complete picture. If we ask the main question, where was Germany's fate decided? The answer will be one: the Eastern Front. For most of the war, up to 75 to 80% of all Wehrmacht forces were concentrated there. And it was there that Germany suffered about 80% of its military losses. This means one simple thing: Germany's main army was not destroyed in France and not in Africa. It was destroyed in Eastern Europe and in the USSR. The Soviet Union mobilized about 34.5 million people for the war, an enormous number of soldiers. Its losses were also enormous. About 24 million dead, of whom up to 10 million were military personnel, and about 14 million were civilians. This was the largest and most brutal front in human history. Stalingrad, Kursk, the siege of Leningrad, the Battle of Moscow. These are not just names. These are the points where Germany's war machine was broken. The battles were so large-scale that in the most intense of them, up to 2 million people were involved, something that is difficult even to imagine today. Therefore, if we measure the contribution of a single country to the destruction of the enemy's main force, the USSR takes first place. But if we look at the war from another perspective, not through blood, but through resources, the picture changes. The United States mobilized about 16.35 million people for the war. Its losses were about 418,000. At the same time, it was the United States that became the industrial center of the war. It produced about 108,000 tanks, almost 2.4 million vehicles, hundreds of thousands of artillery units, a massive Navy and Air Force. Moreover, by the end of the war, the United States was producing up to 2/3 of all Allied military equipment. Even more important was the Lend-Lease program. Through it, the United States supplied its allies with military aid worth about $50 billion in wartime prices, which is equivalent to roughly $690 billion today. This included trucks, fuel, food, aluminum, communications equipment, and much more. Without this, modern war is impossible. And without American support, the Allies would not have had the critical materials needed to produce their own military equipment. If we measure contribution through weapons, industry, logistics, and money, the United States takes first place. There is another factor that is often underestimated. In 1940, France fell. Europe effectively came under German control. At that moment, the United Kingdom remained the only major power in the West that continued the war.
Anytime, summer 1940. A Britain standing alone, yet learning with each dawn new lessons on how to go on as though nothing was happening.
It is important to understand that when we say United Kingdom, we are not just talking about an island. We are talking about an entire empire. The British Empire was a global system that included Canada, Australia, New Zealand, India, African countries, and other territories. That is why mobilization took place not only within Britain itself, but across this entire system. For Britain, the war became not a national conflict, but an imperial one. In total, the British Empire mobilized about 17.8 million people for the war. These were not only British citizens, but also millions of soldiers from the listed colonies and dominions. Its contribution was systemic, and thanks to this contribution, it held the Atlantic. It won the Battle of Britain in the air. It fought in North Africa and the Mediterranean. It provided intelligence and prepared operations. And most importantly, it did not leave the war at its most critical moment. If the United Kingdom had said the phrase so often heard in the 21st century, "This is not our war," and had withdrawn from it in 1940 after the fall of France, the entire course of history could have turned out completely differently. There is a country that is rarely discussed in this context, although its contribution was critical: China. For China, the war began earlier, in 1937, and lasted almost 8 years. During that time, China mobilized millions of military personnel, although exact figures vary due to the nature of record-keeping and the internal situation in the country. China's losses are estimated at 15 to 20 million people, and a significant portion of those losses were civilians. China's key contribution was not industrial or technological. It was that China tied down a massive portion of Germany's ally, the Japanese army. On the mainland, Japan was forced to maintain large forces in China throughout the war. This meant those forces could not be redeployed against the United States, the British Empire, or the Soviet Union. And here, an important scenario arises, one that is rarely discussed. If China had capitulated in the early years of the war, Japan would have gained freedom of action. This would have allowed it to increase pressure in the Pacific and, more importantly, open a full-scale front against the USSR in the Far East. In that case, the Soviet Union would have found itself fighting a war on two fronts, against Germany in the West and Japan in the East. The losses could have been significantly higher, and the outcome of the war could have been entirely different. Thus, China's contribution was not in victories in the classical sense, but in the strategic containment of the enemy, without which the balance of power in the world could have collapsed. If we try to measure the scale of the war not only through human losses but also through economics, the picture becomes even clearer. Military spending of the largest countries was approximately United States, about $341 billion. Germany, $270 billion. Soviet Union, $192 billion. China, $190 billion. United Kingdom, $120 billion. The total cost of the war exceeded $1 trillion in prices of that time. In modern terms, this is approximately $15 to $20 trillion, depending on the calculation method. To understand the scale, this is comparable to the annual GDP of the United States. It exceeds the GDP of most countries in the world combined. World War II was not just a war of armies. It was a war of continents, countries, economies, industries, and financial systems. If we look at the war through production, the picture becomes more balanced. Soviet Union produced about 120,000 tanks. United States, about 108,000. Germany, more than 67,000. United States produced about 2.4 million vehicles and trucks. British Empire, almost 1.5 million. Soviet Union, about 265,000. Soviet Union produced the largest number of artillery units, about 516,000. United States produced about 257,000 units. British Empire, about 226,000. The absolute leader in aircraft production was the United States. It produced about 300,000 aircrafts. Soviet Union produced about 137,000 aircrafts. Germany, about 119,000. United Kingdom, about 131,000. The decisive role in naval warfare and amphibious operations was played by the United States and the United Kingdom. Yes, the Soviet Union produced more tanks, but a significant portion of its mobility, logistics, and supply was supported by Allied deliveries, primarily American trucks, fuel, aluminum, and equipment. The United States, in turn, carried a smaller burden on the land fronts in Europe, but provided a scale that no other country could match. And now, we can return to the main question. It is absolutely clear who lost the war. Of course, Germany lost, but not Germany as a country. What lost was the ideology of that Germany: Nazism, fascism, and aggressive militarism. But who actually won World War II? If we answer in one word, we will almost certainly be wrong. This war is too large and too complex to be reduced to a single country. Therefore, the honest answer sounds different. World War II was won by a coalition. Victory was the result of combined efforts, where each of the key countries fulfilled its own critical role. Remove any one of these roles, and the outcome of the war becomes uncertain.